Okay, everyone. We've managed to get that through, and so glad you could join us tonight. This is part 26 of our study in the book of Revelation. And we are now in chapter 18, verses 1 through 10 tonight. So we're not going to finish chapter 18 yet. That will come probably next week. I'm thinking, I'm pretty sure we'll be done with chapter 18 by next week. But I wanted to give a little background as well from the Old Testament. And so we'll go into the introduction and we'll talk about a few things. Okay, so chapter 17 described to John a vision of a great whore known as Babylon the Great. So that's Revelation 17, verse 5. And God told him why she needed to be destroyed. Okay, and that's in verse 1, chapter 17. Here we have the description of that destruction, how it occurred, and what was the effect upon the people living in this world at the time. Firstly, an angel proclaimed God's judgment on the great city, Revelation chapter 18, verse 1 through 8. Next, the rulers of this world lamented the destruction of the city, Babylon. This is the woman, Revelation 18, verse 9 through 10, as do the merchants who have become rich through their trade with her, and that's Revelation 18, verse 11 through 16. And this includes the ship owners and the captains of merchant ships. So that's Revelation 18, 18 through 20. So basically the rest of the chapter, they're in mourning over her destruction, this destruction of the woman, the harlot, the city, Babylon. Okay, so we'll go into that. Now, I want to point out to you, because for years I've talked about this, and I've read books on this as well. And it's very interesting to note that there is a correlation between the woman or Babylon and the Catholic modern denomination. Okay, there is some correlations that are very interesting. So in chapter 17, which it really gives a description of the woman. The woman is a system known as mother. Well, I find that very interesting because the Catholic denomination refers to the Vatican as the mother. She is headquartered in the city of Seven Hills, or Rome, and that's true. And that's also identified in chapter 17. She holds a cup or chalice, which is the central object used in a Catholic mass. She is wealthy, and the Vatican system is wealthy beyond imagination. There are books on that. She is known for two colors: purple, that's the clothing of the bishops, and scarlet, the clothing of the cardinals. Now, those are a lot of correlations, a lot of identifications that are very interesting. And but even with those and with these correlations, I believe our prophecy is a lot greater than one denomination of professing Christian believers, no matter how large. Now, it's very large. I think they have like 1 billion followers that are Catholics around the world. So it's very interesting. But I think from what I'm studying now and really getting into this, I'm realizing that this can be a deflection from the actual scope of what we're looking at tonight. Because you see, it's not just a part of the world or one part of the world. This is really a reference to the whole world and a system for the whole world. Okay, and this is where I want to really get you thinking. So it's not just one system or one part of the world or a professing Christian denomination with a large denomination professing Christian believers, which is a lot of identification here. But I think it goes beyond that. So in chapter 18, it really describes, because a lot of times what I've done through the years is I've kind of got into chapter 17 as religious Babylon and chapter 18 as economic political Babylon. But then we forget about the beast. So really in chapter 17, we talked about the beast. We didn't really talk about the woman. We did talk about her a little bit. There were some references to her. I mentioned those. But really in chapter 17, we were referring to that beast with 7 heads and 10 horns. And so you came last week. We were studying the 7 heads and the 7 heads and the 10 horns. We were talking about the beast. And so now really chapter 18 is talking about the woman, Babylon. So really that's what I'm seeing now as I study it. It's kind of a late bloomer when it comes to these things, but I'm still learning, trying to understand the scriptures. And Book of Revelation is not an easy book of the Bible. It's very difficult to understand, and I'm sure you understand that and appreciate that. So we're going to go right into chapter 18. We're only looking at verse 1 through 10. Good to see you tonight. Oh, no, it's all right. Glad you're here. Glad you're here. It's good to have you here. Okay, so we're in verse 1. We begin with verse 1. And in verse 1, a great angel comes down from heaven to give a great proclamation. So it's a great angel giving a great proclamation. So it seems that when you study the scriptures, there are angels. Some angels are just like amazing. They're just incredible. This angel is unnamed. We don't know the name of this angel. It's an angel of God. Okay, I don't believe this is God, this angel. No, it's an angel. Okay, and but it's interesting. Okay, so let's look at verse 1. It says, "And after these things, I saw another angel come down from heaven, having great power, and the earth was lightened with his glory." Kind of like with Moses when he came down from the mountain, he shone. He glistened, and he had to put a veil over his face, because if he took the veil off, he would just blind people with the brightness, because he was in God's presence, and being in God's presence made him glisten. And I think this is what we see here. This angel left the presence of God, and now he's glistening, and in such a way. But he has great power. He's got authority. So let's talk about this angel for a minute. John saw an angel with great authority behind him. Now, this angel was so mighty and glorious that the earth grew bright with his splendor. He was like the sun, reflecting the glory of God himself, from whose presence, like I said, the angel had come. He had left heaven. Obviously, God had told him to do something. This angel would be bringing the final message of destruction upon the whore, this evil world system of the Antichrist. That's really what it is. We can get down to it. He would bring light to the darkness, and so that's what he's doing. He's going to shed some light on the darkness. Amen. I think there's a little bit of an irony there, but there he is. He's really glistening. So now this angel cried out mightily. So he's not just going to shine and sparkle the earth with the glory of God, which when he left the Lord's presence and all that, but he's also going to cry out. And it says here, put up the verse for you, and he cried mightily with a strong voice, saying, "Babylon the great is fallen, and is become the habitation of devils, and the hold of every foul spirit, and a cage of every unclean and hateful bird." Okay, so here he's crying out, and he's talking about 2 falls of Babylon, and Babylon the Great, of course, is this woman that's sitting upon a beast in chapter 17, right? Okay, and Babylon is fallen, 2 falls. Interesting. Okay, so as discussed previously from Revelation 17:1, the name Babylon would be immediately assumed by John's readers to be Rome. Yeah, they would think it would be Rome. Okay. Excuse me. While they had been correct at the time, this symbol goes far beyond political Rome to a world system surrounding religion and economics and great political sway that would be under the control of the Antichrist and would be completely against God and his people. So you see, you got 3 main areas in this world. You've got You've got economics. That's a control of this world. Would you agree? Yeah. And then you got politics. Is that a control? Oh, absolutely. And then you've got religion. Okay. And there's a lot of religion in the world. We know that. Okay. And so there's the three main areas. Of course, this false prophet is going to be uh, demanding worship, and they're going to worship the devil, and that's even though it's devil worship, it's going to be a religious thing, isn't it? Yeah, sure. It's going to be terrible, but that's the thing, isn't it? Okay, so it's under the power of the Antichrist. Now, this shining angel gave a shout that the great city had been destroyed. This angel has arrived to bring a light to a dark mystery. Remember when we started the woman, because this is why we can get in so much, morass kind of, because we're trying to figure out a mystery. And many times when you're looking at a mystery, I don't know if you've ever watched like a TV program about who done it, and then maybe you were thinking, oh, they did it, and then you find out later and they didn't do it. It was, oh wow, really? Okay, so you know what I mean? Have you ever done that? You're saying no, that's the guy or that's the lady, and then it turns out to be, yeah, and that's the thing is, yeah, something like that, like a Murder She Wrote or something like that. Okay, well, this is the sort of thing. This angel's now given a shout that the great city had. So he's going to bring light to this dark mystery. Now, notice that there are two falls. Remember, he says Babylon the Great has fallen, has fallen. So, and it says Babylon was a hideout of demons and evil spirits, and now has literally become a cesspit of destruction. She turns into a haunt from which the foul demons will watch over her desolate ruins. What we see here is an image of this desolation, don't we? We see vultures, ravens, and all kinds of disease-ridden carrion birds, and they will be found in her desolate places. We find this to be likened to the Old Testament prophecies against the ancient city of Babylon, which parallels here to the destruction described by John from his metaphorical Babylon to make its final death throe. So whether or not that the world order is going to be called Babylon, it might be, but maybe not. Maybe it's just a metaphor. I think that could be very likely. Now, the ancient Babylon fell long ago, and so will this one. This angel is announcing that the formerly great and luxurious city, Babylon, has now turned into a total wasteland filled with everything imaginable from which is evil, wicked, and unclean. Everything that is evil, wicked, and clean will be filled in that city. The great city, the harlot, has become a haunt of demons. Doesn't sound like a nice place. What do you think? Okay. So then in verse 3, we can see that Babylon here is an evil concept, a wicked ideal. I think that's really when we get down to it. It's an ideal. It's a concept now. Okay. There is more than physical fornication involved. There is political, economic, material, and spiritual adultery as well. So there's a lot going on. And what we call it in our society, in our world, we call it corruption, right? Okay. Yeah. And do we have corruption in the world today? We have a lot of it. Okay. And it doesn't matter what country you're talking about, there's corruption there. Would you agree? And there's a lot going on behind the scenes. But when the Antichrist comes, it's going to be it's pretty open now. I think that's telling us that we're getting close. Would you agree? Okay. I mean, it used to be a lot of that was hidden, but it seems like it's now coming out, coming out of the cupboard. Not good. Tells us we're getting close to the end. And then during the time of Antichrist, it's going to be very much open. Would you agree? It's going to be very much open, isn't it? I mean, just blatant Satanism, satanic worship. Okay. So it's an evil concept. It's a wicked ideal. Notice here, for all the nations have drunk of the wine of the wrath of her fornication, and the kings of the earth have committed fornication with her, and the merchants of the earth are waxed rich through the abundance of her delicacies. Okay. And this is really, really an interesting verse because it's talking about what is going on. That this Babylon that is being referred to is seen, and people are involved with her and actually making money by her or through her. They're becoming rich, it says. So, what very interesting there. And do people get a lot of money through corruption? What do you think? Oh, absolutely. Oh, yeah. There's some people that have made a lot of money through. I don't go into all the details, but I'm sure you can go in and look into some of that. And I tell you what, whenever I get into that too much, I just want to turn it off because it's just so awful, isn't it? Terrible. So when I think of this, I think of a passage in Proverbs that warns against adultery. So we're talking about adultery. I'm sure we're talking about adultery, but we're talking about spiritual adultery as well. Not only physical adultery, but spiritual adultery. And we could even say corruption economically and economic adultery. I don't know if we want to, however we want to call that, but anyway. So I'm just gonna read something to you and let us realize how the world is committed to adultery, or why don't we just say idolatry? Does that fit pretty well? Yeah, it does, doesn't it? And against who? Who do we commit idolatry against? Against God, against the Lord. And by going after an idolatrous concept that is as old as the world's oldest profession is claimed to be. Old. It's not something new. It's something that is very, very old. I mean, when you talk about Babylon, you can go all the way back to the time since Noah, can't you? To the city and the tower, right? Then you can kind of fast forward and go into the Chaldeans, which called their nation Babylon, Babylonians or Babylonia. Okay, probably referring to the original city that was there in that plain, in the plains of Shinar, which is what they called it originally, Fertile Crescent. And then it becomes a worldwide system, and it surrounds the same concepts of corruption and idolatry and adultery. Okay, what do you think? Okay, so let's go on. And by the way, a religious organization can take those things as well. Just I can just bring that in there too. Of course you can. There are, and it's not just one denomination of Christians. There can be other groups as well. And then you got religious people from other groups. They're making a load of money through lies and deceit. Would you agree? Absolutely, 100%. So let's not just go into one area. Let's look at it as it is fully, because I think a lot of times what we want to do is kind of push it over there and say, oh, I'm okay over here. Really? No, I don't think so. So let's look at this verse, because these verses, I wanted to give it to you in their entirety, or just till verse 22, from 10 to 22. And so just let me read this to you. When wisdom entereth into thine heart, and knowledge is pleasant unto thy soul. Discretion shall preserve thee, understanding shall keep thee, to deliver thee from the way of the evil man, from the man that speaketh froward things. Froward in this context means perverse things. He's perverted. Okay, who leave the paths of uprightness and walk in the ways of darkness. Who rejoice to do evil and delight in the frowardness of the wicked. So other people's perverse lives, they actually enjoy that. They get entertainment from it. Whose ways are crooked, and they froward in their paths. Notice how froward is used quite a lot. You can put perverted, pretty much. That's what that is referring to deliver thee from the strange woman. Sorry, you going to say something? Yeah, twisted. Yeah, perverted is twisted. Okay. To deliver thee from the strange woman, even from the stranger which flattereth with her words, who forsaketh the guide of her youth and forgetteth the covenant of her God. For her house inclineth unto death, and her paths unto the dead. None that go unto her return again, neither take they hold of the paths of life. I wonder what that's referring to. Could that be a little bit metaphorical? It might be. But I think it's interesting as we get to the end of this. That thou mayest walk in the way of good men and keep the paths of the righteous. For the upright shall dwell in the land, and the perfect shall remain in it. You know, that sounds like to me that perfect shall remain in it. Is there anybody that would like to guess where I'm going with that? Right? But a Bible verse, perhaps. You think you got something, Brett, there over there? Okay, yeah, yeah, I think so. I think this is referring to Christ's millennium. Now, let me read it again to you. It says, for the upright, excuse me, shall dwell in the land, and the perfect shall remain in it. Now, remember, Jesus gave a beatitude. He said, blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. How interesting. Okay. So here you have a reference in Proverbs to Christ's millennium. So if that is a reference to Christ's millennium, then perhaps maybe we're going a little bit deeper than just somebody running off and being unfaithful. Okay. But if you go on, it's the next thing says here, but the wicked shall be cut off from the earth. And so I put a little parentheses there. That's my doing, by the way. Babylon, and the transgressors shall be rooted out of it. So somebody that's transgressing, somebody that's involved in a system of corruption and evil, and they poured their life into it and they've given themselves to it, and they're sad if it goes away. What does that say about them? No, exactly. And do you think God needs to destroy that? Oh, absolutely. So are we getting where this is the reason why Babylon is destroyed. So he describes it here, all the nations will drink from the wine of God's wrath, since the world is partaking of this evil even in this day. So I'm going back, just so I didn't confuse you. I'm going back to verse 3. Let me just read it again. For all nations have drunk of the wine of the wrath of her fornication, and the kings of the earth have committed fornication with her, and the merchants of the earth are waxed rich through the abundance of her delicacies. You see that? Okay. All right. So the nations will drink from the wine of God's wrath, since the world is partaking of this evil even in our day. You think that's the case here? Yes. We find that Babylon personifies everything that is evil, including different forms of adultery and indecency. Remember, he talks about these unclean birds. In Hebrew writing, in Hebrew scripture, whenever they refer to unclean birds, that's like a desolate place. And many times it's referring to demons. Remember, Christ would even give parables about the birds would dwell on the branches of the mustard plant and all that. And so it's interesting when you think about that. Okay, so Babylon personifies everything that is evil, including different forms of adultery and indecency, idolatry, greed, and the bringing of political and personal oppression and death of the innocent. It's all mentioned. We find that there will be people of the world who have and will turn completely away from God to enjoy the seductiveness of what the harlot Babylon is offering by her storehouses of immorality and idolatry. And there are people that would not give God a look, not even give him a glance. Okay. Their whole life is consumed with something else that is away from God. Once again, do you agree? Of course. We know this is true. We know this is true. I think many times when we see this mystery, it's closer to us than we realize. It's closer to all of us than we realize it is. You know, it's on our phones, it's on our computers. It's, you know, it's just there. Okay. You know, it's there. All right. And so the Old Testament uses adultery to describe spiritual apostasy. Jeremiah in chapter 3 talked about that, referring to the nation Israel. Hosea also married Gomer, remember that? And gave reference to this. In the final days, we find that apostasy will reach a pinnacle in the worship of the dragon and the beast and his image. Revelation chapter 13. Okay, I think now we're starting to see this terrible vision unfold. I can't go to my next thing. Oh, that's fine. Okay. Okay, so this Babylon finds us close to home. John tells us that the rulers of a world have committed adultery with her, meaning that they have involved themselves in shameful sins that have given up their vitality to indulge in the gratifying of their wicked flesh. Is that true? Oh boy, I could talk about that tonight. I'm not going to do that, but I can get. It's not far away, and to see these things happening. This adultery probably refers to forming sinful political and economic alliances by the abandoning of what is right and moral before God. It doesn't matter if they say they believe in God or not. Also, it reveals that the merchants throughout the world have become rich because of their luxurious living with Babylon the harlot. They seduced themselves by great riches that could be gained by the relationship with this whorish system, Babylon. Isaiah 47, verse 8 through 9 describe the great luxury of Babylon and God's wrath against her. And it's so interesting when you go to the Old Testament and you tie these all in together, you start to see where it's referring to. So there's the verses for you. Therefore, hear now this, that thou that are given to pleasures, that dwellest carelessly, that saith in thine heart, I am. That's self-deification. Do you see that? And there is none else beside me. Boy, do we live in that day today. Got a lot of self-deification going on nowadays. I shall not sit as a widow, neither shall I know the loss of children. But these two things shall come to thee in a moment, in one day, the loss of children and widowhood. And they shall come upon thee and their perfection for all the multitude of thy sorceries and for the great abundance of thine enchantments. So this basically, Babylon is described here in Isaiah 47 as a witch. You see that, okay? God has no areas of complimentary or speaking in a complimentary way towards this Babylon, okay? Not at all. Luxury led to pride and to being self-sufficient. We find that part of this adultery was their selling out to Satan by the taking of the mark of the beast, because these merchants were not able to buy or sell without his mark. Remember that in Revelation 13, verse 7. They can't buy or sell unless they get this mark of the beast. All right. Now, in verse 4 and 5, another voice. Now, not only do we have this first angel, and he's pretty much done his thing, now you have another voice that commands from heaven, and this is a command for the people of God to come out of Babylon. Okay? And I heard another voice from heaven saying, come out of her, my people, that ye be not partakers of her sins, and that ye receive not of her plagues. For her sins have reached unto heaven, and God hath remembered her iniquities. Now, let me just give you a little preface before I go into what Jeremiah is referring to, because this is interesting when it comes to that verse, come out come out of her, my people. Okay. We are in the world, but we are not to be of the world. We are not to love this world. We are not to be attached to this world. We should be apart from this world. We have to pay bills. We have to pay rent. We have to do a lot of things. And we have to use money to do that. And we have to follow the system of money and tax paying or whatever we need to do to live on this earth. That's what we do. Okay. But that doesn't mean we set our heart to those things and live solely for that. Okay. So just keep that in mind as we go into the other parts, because sometimes people read this and say, oh, well, I just need to go off in some mountain and live in a cave somewhere. No, that's not what God wants you to do. He wants you to reach the world for Christ. And while you're reaching the world for Christ, you got to live in the world. Paul lived in Rome, didn't he? Okay. He didn't go off into a monastery somewhere or off to some mountain in the Himalayas. He didn't do that because there's nobody out there in the mountain of the Himalayas. He wanted to go where the souls were and reach them for Christ. Right. Right. Oh yeah, of course it does. Oh yeah, it sure is. It sure it is. Yeah. Oh, I agree with that. Of course, in that reference, I would follow you at 100%. Okay. Excuse me. So next, this reminds us of what Jeremiah prophesied regarding the ancient city of Babylon. Now, next week, I'm going to talk a little bit more about Jeremiah and what he ended up doing. Brett and I were talking about last night. I talked to my wife a little bit about it today. But there are two chapters of Jeremiah, chapter 50 and 51, that were sent specifically to Babylon, this ancient Babylon, and read to the people. Okay. Now, I'll talk a little bit about that next week. But in chapter 51 of Jeremiah, it's going to this ancient city of Babylon. Some expositors want to say that it has a double meaning into our day. Now, there's a possibility it might, but really the purpose was to help the people in that time. Okay, so I'll get to the next point in just a moment. So this reminds us of what Jeremiah prophesied. So he told the Babylonians, and they told the Israelites or Israelis there in the people, the national Israelis there in Babylon. He told them, and the believers that were in Babylon, he says, flee out of the midst of Babylon and deliver every man his soul. So he says, get out. Be not cut off in their iniquity, for this is the time of the Lord's vengeance. He will render unto her, or Babylon, a recompense. He's going to pay her for her evil deeds. So get out. And I believe that John, this passage in Revelation 18, verse 4 and 5, is referring to Jeremiah 51, verse 6. Interesting, isn't it? Now, we will give reference to these prophecies written by Jeremiah, what he wrote against Babylon throughout the study in chapter 18. I'll come back to it next week and talk a little bit more about it. But it's interesting when you go into the history and the book of Jeremiah and what the purpose of his ministry was all about. Now we hear another voice warning about this future evil system that will culminate with the Antichrist. God is calling to his people not to take part in her sins. Just as God had brought vengeance upon the ancient city of Babylon because of her cruelty to others, so God is ready to judge the crimes of the nations who have fought against him and have persecuted his people, eventually resulting in the sins that are piled as high as heaven itself. God remembers, and he will unleash his wrath. To give an answer to all the questions of why wicked people prosper, we find here that God points out that he knows everything, he knows it all, and will bring punishments to everything and everyone involved. No one will escape his hand. And life is short, my friend. Very short. Okay? God's tribulation saints are called to separate themselves or to come out of her. There are two main reasons that this should happen. Number one, God does not want his people to share in the sins of general society. Doesn't want us to do that. And number two, he does not want his people to eventually share in society's wrath from himself. Therefore, we must always be aware that we must never compromise with a godless society. That is Babylon. She is a concept. To compromise will mean facing punishment, or we could suffer the loss of reward at the judgment seat of Christ. Even though come out could refer to physical separation from places of wickedness and evil, it can also refer to a spiritual, mental, and emotional separation from the sins that are plaguing our current society. We, as the church, must always stand firm on the tried and tested foundations of our biblical faith, never swayed to the whims of evil society. Yeah, exactly. And what's going on in our day? Okay, and now in verse 6 and 7, God will bring repayment for the wickedness of Babylon. Don't think that God is just smiling at this world and thinking, oh, it's just funny and cute. He's not laughing. He's not laughing at all. He's going to bring judgment. He will. And when he brings it, it will be total. It will be complete. Okay? And you're going to see that next week. We're going to talk more about the destruction of Babylon and the groups of people who will be mourning her. That should not be one of us. Amen. Okay. Now let's look at verse 6 and 7 with that in mind. Reward her even as she rewarded you. Double unto her according to her works. In the cup which she hath filled, fill to her double. Wow. How much she hath glorified herself, and lived deliciously. So much torment and sorrow give her, for she saith in her heart, I sit a queen and am no widow, and shall see no sorrow. Does that sound like a verse that we just read just a little while ago? Yes, that is a reference to Isaiah 47, verse 8. I showed that to you a little bit earlier. I read that out to you. Okay, it's the same thing. So he's actually quoting from Isaiah chapter 47, verse 8. So, it's not working. Okay. Okay, that's fine. The people of Babylon had lived in luxury and pleasure. Babylon was boasting of being a queen who would not experience sorrow. This prophecy of Babylon here was a quote given earlier from Isaiah 47, verse 8, just what I just referred to. Now, we looked at that earlier, of course. We saw that. We went into both verses, verse 8 and verse 9. That she, as Babylon, would not experience any trouble at all. Instead, God's wrath will be poured upon her with devastating effect. Okay? This is what we're seeing here. Now, in history, Rome also was filled with luxury and pride. Remember, there was no Catholic denomination in John's day, okay? But there was Rome, and Rome had 7 hills, no doubt. So it was filled with luxury, it was filled with pride, and as have other powerful kingdoms of the world. They've been filled with luxury and pride. I mean, you can go to different parts of the world, in China, you can go down to the Incas and Aztecs of South America and Central America, and they lived in opulent wealth and luxury. They sure did have people working for them, slaves, all this, and it was an awful thing, very satanic, awful stuff they got up to. So Rome was this way. And in the end, Rome would receive what it had given out. The Roman law is known as lex talionis. It's defined as a person's punishment should match his or her crime. So that was part of Roman law. Obviously, they didn't follow that with Christ. Even so, during this future judgment, however, the angel commanded that God would pour upon her a double penalty for all her wicked deeds. Now, once again, Jeremiah had written against ancient Babylon. Well, I hunger to tell you about this. If we got a little time, I'll try to, but I'd really like to cover it next week because I got so much more to show you. This is Jeremiah 51, verse 34 through 35. And Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, hath devoured me, he hath crushed me. He hath made me an empty vessel. He hath swallowed me up like a dragon. He hath filled his belly with my delicacies. He hath cast me out. The violence done to me and my flesh be upon Babylon. Shall the inhabitant of Zion say, and my blood upon the inhabitants of Chaldea? Shall Jerusalem say? I mean, it just, wow, that's quite a verse there. So in verse 8, the destruction of Babylon will be swift and sudden. Now, where would that be found, that swift and sudden judgment? Well, we'll look at that. For all her self-sufficiency, pride, and wicked authority, Revelation 18, verse 6, she will be overtaken by the ugliness of her own evil. The most beautiful, powerful, and wicked city in this world will not be able to stand against our holy God, who will intervene and allow this evil to run its course to destroy itself. Remember how the beast eats the woman, he destroys her, burns her with fire, all this. Evil attacks evil, destroys itself, it's self-destructive. In a single day, Babylon will face death, mourning, and famine, everything that she had been able to avoid so far by her great wealth and power. So during the tribulation time, there will be still people on the earth, even with all those judgments, they will be living in a very wealthy way. Perhaps they'll be in the, caves somewhere, living with their little society down there or something. I don't know. But it's interesting to know that the cave's going to collapse, okay? Because in Revelation chapter 16, verse 18 and 19, let me remind you, and it says, and remember this is the final vial judgment, and there were voices and thunders and lightnings, and there was a great earthquake, such as was not since men were upon the earth, so mighty an earthquake and so great. And the great city was divided into 3 parts, and the cities of the nations fell. And great Babylon came in remembrance before God to give unto her the cup of the wine of the fierceness of his wrath. So there it is, the destruction of Babylon. We already saw that in chapter 16. Okay, so yeah, maybe they have their little city under a mountain somewhere, and then what will God do? He'll just shake that mountain to pieces. And what will happen to their beautiful little city that they built up for themselves with their opulent wealth and, self-contained whatever? Is it going to stand up against God's wrath of shaking the mountain to pieces? I don't think so. Okay. So in the end, she will be consumed by fire, unable to escape her destruction. She will be unable to put out the fire as it sweeps through her and destroys everything. Jeremiah had prophesied of ancient Babylon in Jeremiah 51, verse 58, and this is what it says. Thus saith the Lord of hosts, the broad walls of Babylon shall be utterly broken, and her high gates shall be burned with fire, and the people shall labor in vain, and the folk in the fire, and they shall be weary. Okay, it's interesting when you go into the past, look into the fall of Babylon in the past. Remember, it talks about 2 falls. Maybe that perhaps is the first one. Yeah. 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 I mean, it's interesting when you look at this in the light of Jeremiah 50 and 51. All right. And now in verse 9 through 10, the evil and amoral, and somebody that doesn't have any morals is amoral, merchants and politicians will mourn over her destruction. We've got some politicians in society that are very amoral, okay? I can tell you a little bit about American politicians that are very amoral, and I'm not happy about it, of course, because I hate this Babylon system. But there are some people, they love it. They'll live for it. That's what they do. Okay. I'm a Christian. I hate it. All right. First. Yeah, it does. It is. It is the parallel. And so it's so interesting as you're pointing out. Excuse me. And the kings of the earth who have committed fornication and lived deliciously with her shall bewail her and lament for her when they shall see the smoke of her burning, standing afar off for the fear of her torment, saying, Alas, alas, that great city Babylon, that mighty city, for in 1 hour is thy judgment come. So they're mourning over this terrible, terrible, disgusting, and decrepit system that I don't know. It's just anyway, there you go. Yeah. Yeah. Like, yeah, the Belshazzar. Yeah, well, he sees the handwriting on the wall. And I think this is really the handwriting on the wall type of thing that you're pointing out. So yeah, very well. That's a good point there you've made. But yeah, I mean, it's so interesting when you study the Old Testament. Book of Revelation is like an addition to the Old Testament in a way, because it's the only book in the New Testament that's written like the book of Zechariah or the book of Daniel or the book of Ezekiel. Really interesting. Okay, so let's go to the next thing. Leaders who control various parts of the political and economic system will mourn over Babylon's fall. I'm going to rejoice. Amen. Verses 9 through 20 gives us the funeral dirge concerning the fall of Babylon, which will be sung by three different groups. The first to sing are the rulers of this world, verse 9 through 10. The second are the merchants of the world, verse 11 through 16. And the last are the ship owners, or the people who are doing the transport of goods, verse 17 through 20. We'll go into that next week. These all have grown rich because of the evil and corrupt economy represented by Babylon. The fall of this evil world system will affect badly all who enjoyed and lived for it. That's all they live for. Okay. God says, you live for that. Listen, we live in this world. We have to make some money to live. I understand that. I'm not against that. Okay. Please don't get me wrong. Okay. Don't get me wrong tonight. You got to make money. You got to work your job. You got to pay your rent or mortgage or whatever you're paying. You got to do those things. And so do I. But that doesn't mean we have to be attached to it. That's all we live for, because there are people, and you know this is true. They live for it. They'll lie for it. They'll do anything for it. That's their whole world. And if it goes away, they are so angry. They you know what I mean? Okay. All right. So it will affect them badly. All who enjoyed and lived for it. No, not one of them will remain unaffected by Babylon's fall. Their dream of prosperity without God will die. That's what it is. It's prosperity without God. Okay? Yeah. Firstly, we hear from the rulers who are given their power to the Antichrist and have committed their wicked acts with Babylon. As a reward for their submission to receive the mark of the beast, these compromised leaders enjoyed the harlot's great luxury. But when it is all destroyed, they will run and be terrified by her great torments and will stand away from a distance. It seems that the destruction will be so great that they do not want to be caught up in the fall. They will not try to rescue the city because they will realize that it is futile to do so. They will be terrified because without Babylon, they are nothing. All they are is clay mixed with water. And that's all we are, by the way. We're just clay mixed with water that are mortal. Babylon was all a pipe dream leading to nowhere. Yet they are filled with terror over Babylon. But most important, they are terrified over their own situation where they have found themselves too late to do anything about it. It's just too late. They've gotten to the end and it's too late. It's a trap. Yeah, turn into a pillar of salt. And, you know, I haven't thought of I haven't thought about all these different but it's interesting how as I'm getting this, these are popping up into your heads and you're thinking about, well, that connects with this and that connects with that. And where do you find that? You find that in the Old Testament. And how God brought judgment to pagan nations like Sodom and Gomorrah, like Babylon. He did that. Assyria, Egypt, Phoenicia. I mean, you can just go down the line. Greece. I mean, you just go down the line and you can see how God has brought destruction to these nations because of their sin. And to think that God's not going to bring destruction to the society that we're living in today.
And he's destroyed them because they're just
right. Right. Right.
And then those who he wanted to have mercy on wouldn't have had that.
Yeah.
But at the end, this is at the end where everyone's had their chance now. This is the culmination of this pyramid that man is trying to.
Yeah, he's built his pyramid, and he's got his luxury, and he's got his wealth, and everything just goes and crashing down in one day. Go ahead. You're gonna say? No, it's all right. Oh, Zacchaeus.
Sorry, it just brings it all back.
It brings it all back to you about Zacchaeus. Yeah, and so the Zacchaeus, here he is. He's a man. He's corrupt. He's taking out handouts. He runs away from his people. Everything, and then he wants to see Jesus. And when he sees Jesus, he says, "I want to believe in that guy. I want to follow Jesus." And so Jesus walks right up to this tree and says, "Zacchaeus, come down. I want to come to your house today." And Zacchaeus is like, "Oh, exactly what I wanted." And he came down rejoicing. But of course, everybody around him is saying, "Oh, I know what Zacchaeus is doing." They're judging him and all this, condemning him. But Zacchaeus was sincere. He really, really, he came out from it. Yeah. And that really, when you get down to it, what Zacchaeus was involved in was Babylon. Okay. And what the Romans were involved in, and what Herod was involved in, and so Babylon is not something new. It's not a concept that is new. It's a very old concept. And it's a concept of luxury and wealth and everything that the world can ask for without God. And don't get stuck up, don't get stuck into that. That's what I'm saying. That's why he says, "Come out from her, my people." Don't be a partaker of that. Don't give your life as a believer and lose everything, all your rewards. Stand before God ashamed that you didn't live for him. And if there were times when you didn't live for him, then you remember where that took you, okay, and where it brought you. And do you want to go back to that? And the answer to that is, of course I don't. I don't want that because I know that that's no good. You see? So you stay living for Christ. You're going to live for Christ. You're going to do what's right. You're going to honor God. And yeah, you got to make money. You've got to live in this world. Obviously do. But God is what you're after. Amen. Yeah, you're in the world, but you're not of the world. Okay, so I think we have a lot of good thoughts tonight. And I don't know if there's anybody that's online that maybe want to bring something to the table, because I'm done. But we're going to talk a little bit more next week. I want to get with you and talk with you about Jeremiah 50 and 51. But we'll talk about that next week, because we ran out of time tonight. Yeah.